I don't tell this story very often because every time I do, somebody thinks I'm making it up. I wish I was. This happened about 8 years ago when I was backpacking alone in the Appalachian Mountains. I've hiked those mountains most of my life. My dad taught me when I was a kid, and by the time this happened I'd spent hundreds of nights in the woods. I knew how to read weather. I knew how to stay found. I wasn't some tourist wandering off a trail in flip-flops. That's why what happened still bothers me. I can't explain it. I started my trip on a Friday afternoon. The plan was simple: hike about 10 miles, camp near a ridgeline, then continue the next day. The weather was perfect. Cool air. Blue sky. Not a soul around. By sunset I'd found a small clearing just off the trail. Nothing unusual. A flat patch of ground surrounded by rhododendron thickets and tall hardwoods. I pitched my tent, cooked dinner, and sat listening to the woods settle for the night. If you've spent enough time in the mountains, you know there's a point after dark when everything changes. The daytime sounds fade. The forest gets quieter. Not silent. Just different. Around 10 p.m. I climbed into my sleeping bag. I remember checking my phone. No signal. Battery at 43%. Then I fell asleep. I woke up sometime after midnight. At first I didn't know why. Everything was dark except for a faint glow through the tent fabric. Moonlight. I lay there listening. Then I heard it. A whistle. 3 notes. Soft. Far away. Almost musical. I figured it was another camper. Maybe somebody messing around at their campsite. The whistle came again. 3 notes. Exactly the same. I checked my watch. 1:17 a.m. The sound seemed to be coming from down the slope below camp. I wasn't concerned. Not yet. Then I realized something. The whistle wasn't moving. Whoever made it had been standing in the exact same spot for several minutes. I listened. Another whistle. 3 notes. Same pitch. Same rhythm. No variation. No movement. The hair on the back of my neck started to stand up. People don't usually stand motionless in the woods at 1 in the morning whistling the same tune over and over. I unzipped the tent slightly and looked outside. The ridgeline was silver under the moon. The trees cast long shadows across the slope. Nothing moved. The whistle came again. This time it sounded slightly closer. Not much. Maybe 20 yards. But enough for me to notice. I grabbed my headlamp. The sensible part of my brain said it was probably another hiker. The other part, the part that had spent years in the wilderness, was suddenly uncomfortable. I switched on the light and swept it across the hillside. Nothing. No reflection. No eye shine. No movement. Just trees. The whistle stopped. Instantly. As soon as the beam touched the slope. I stood there waiting. The woods felt wrong. That's the best way I can describe it. Not dangerous. Wrong. Like I'd walked into a room where a conversation had abruptly ended. I waited nearly 5 minutes. Nothing. Eventually I convinced myself I was being ridiculous. I zipped the tent shut and lay back down. 10 minutes later the whistle returned. 3 notes. Now much closer. I sat upright. This time I knew immediately something had changed. The sound was no longer coming from below the ridge. It was coming from the trees directly outside camp. Maybe 50 yards away. I froze. The whistle came again. 3 notes. Then silence. Then again. Closer. 30 yards. I switched on my headlamp and listened. No footsteps. No snapping branches. No rustling leaves. Just the whistle. Somehow getting closer without making any other sound. I don't care how experienced you are. At that point your imagination starts working against you. I kept telling myself it had to be a person. A weird person. But a person. Then I heard something that made my stomach drop. A response whistle. 3 notes. From farther down the mountain. The exact same tune. The exact same pitch. A few seconds later the closer whistle answered. Back and forth. Like they were communicating. Except neither one sounded human anymore. The notes were too perfect. Too identical. No breathiness. No mistakes. Like somebody pressing play on the same recording over and over. The exchange continued for several minutes. One whistle below. One whistle near camp. Then silence. I checked the time again. 1:46 a.m. The forest had become unnaturally quiet. No insects. No owls. No distant animals. Nothing. I sat inside the tent gripping a hiking pole like it was a weapon. Then came the sound I'll never forget. A third whistle. Behind my tent. Less than 10 feet away. 3 notes. Perfectly clear. I nearly jumped out of my skin. The sound was so close it felt like someone was standing directly outside the nylon fabric. I held my breath. Every instinct screamed at me not to look. The whistle came again. Right behind me. I slowly turned my head toward the rear wall of the tent. And saw a shadow. Not a clear shape. Just a darker patch against the moonlit fabric. Tall. Motionless. Watching. I snapped on the headlamp and lunged for the zipper. By the time I got outside, there was nothing there. The clearing was empty. No footprints. No movement. No sound. Except one final whistle drifting through the trees below. Then another answering whistle farther away. As if whatever had been near my tent had already moved hundreds of yards in seconds. I didn't sleep again that night. I packed my gear before dawn. The moment there was enough light to see the trail, I started hiking. The entire morning I felt like I was being watched. Every few minutes I'd stop and listen. Nothing. By noon I started convincing myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Sleep deprivation. Mountain acoustics. An overactive imagination. Then I reached a trail junction. There was an older man sitting on a fallen log eating breakfast. The first person I'd seen in almost 2 days. We exchanged greetings and started talking. I mentioned where I'd camped. His expression changed immediately. He asked me a strange question. Did you hear whistling? The smile disappeared from my face. I asked how he knew. The old man stared at me for several seconds before answering. Then he said something I still think about. Because everybody who camps near that ridge hears it eventually. I laughed nervously. He didn't. He told me he'd lived in the area most of his life. Hunters talked about it. Hikers talked about it. Even some local residents. Always the same story. Whistling at night. 3 notes. Moving through the woods. Sometimes close. Sometimes distant. But never seen clearly. I asked what people thought it was. He shrugged. Then he said something that chilled me. The ones who go looking for it usually stop talking about it. I figured he was messing with me, trying to scare a tourist. But then he pointed toward the ridge. I'd stay off that mountain after dark. That was the end of the conversation. A few minutes later we went our separate ways. I finished my hike and drove home. For a while I managed to put the experience behind me. Until 3 months later. I was going through photos from the trip. Mostly landscape shots. Camp pictures. Nothing special. Then I found one taken just before sunset. A photo of my campsite. At first everything looked normal. Tent. Trees. Camp stove. Then I noticed something standing among the rhododendrons at the edge of the frame. A figure. Partially hidden. Too tall. Too thin. Dark enough that I couldn't make out details. I don't know how I'd missed it before. I zoomed in. The image became grainy. Distorted. But one thing stood out. The figure appeared to be facing directly toward the camera. Toward me. I checked the timestamp. The photo had been taken hours before the whistling started. I've shown that picture to other people. Most say it's just a tree. A trick of the light. Maybe they're right. I honestly hope they are. But every now and then, when I'm alone outside at night, I remember those 3 notes echoing through the mountains. And sometimes, when the wind moves through the trees just right, I catch myself listening. Waiting. Wondering if somewhere beyond the ridge, something is still whistling back.